drifting and away just shoot out of the headphones, and then the rest of it tails away. And it doesn't sound good. So this is why you have to listen in context of the whole track. The second principle is that it really helps to have an aim. At least 70% of the time when compressing, I'm trying to actually have a clear aim of what to do. The other 30% is just wild sound design and hoping for the best, okay? But what I'm going to show you is the difference between the compressed and uncompressed audio. So I've already compressed this and I'll show you the difference. So the top one here is the original signal and the bottom is the compressed signal. And to an untrained eye, they don't actually look that different. But if we take a really close look, what you'll see is that overall the compressed version just looks fatter. There's less difference between the peak and the rest of the sort of low-level information. If I take the compressed signal and just drag it on top of the original signal, you'll see that the peak values don't change that much, but overall the waveform just becomes a lot more thick and fat, especially in areas like this third phrase here, where the vocal starts to trail away in the middle and become really sort of weak and anxious. On the compressed version, it stays strong through that phrase.
With you tonight, oh, I just might pack my bags and leave. With you tonight, oh, I just might pack my bags and leave.
I really hope you can hear a big difference between those two examples. Definitely go back and listen again if you're struggling to hear the differences. Try to listen on speakers as well, because you'll hear the sound sort of in 3D a little bit better. Let's dive through all these settings. This plugin happens to be a limiter and compressor in one, because they're very closely linked, but I'm not going to be using the limiting section at all. So I've got my threshold, ratio, attack, release. I've got my parallel processing, my makeup gain. You'll be able to find these settings in virtually any compressor you're using. The first thing to do, and I'll explain what all these settings do in more detail, set the ratio so that it's more than 1 to 1. Set it to something at least 2 to 1. This means that when we adjust other settings, there will be compression, and I'll explain why in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do, this is probably the only time that I'm going to set something by looking at the screen and the output. Every other dial I'm just going to set by listening to it, okay? So I'm going to adjust the threshold until I can see that I'm getting some sort of compression. I'll also hear it. And what this will sound like is just a reduction in volume. Initially, it's not actually going to sound any better at all. It's just going to sound like my vocal is being randomly reduced in volume. So let's take a listen and we'll lower this threshold until the signal is passing over the threshold. Now the threshold is in dB. So if my threshold is at -20, that means the signal needs to go over -20 before we get any processing. So let's play.
I've been drifting.
So we're not getting any compression there, so I'll just lower it.
Away.
Now I can see that we're getting some gain reduction.
Oh, I just...
So right there you can see on the screen here, there's some gain reduction. It says maybe -6, -7 dBs. And also down here, there was a little gain reduction readout. How this is shown in every compressor is a bit different, but for now I'm just looking to get some compression just so I can get a flavor for it. Don't try to aim for any specific numbers. I know loads of people say 3 to 6 dB of compression, but to be honest, sometimes I need 15 dBs for it to sound good, and other times I don't need any compression at all. So you've just got to do what sounds right. So for now, I've set the compression threshold as -25 dB, and this means that whenever the signal passes over -25 dB, so is greater than that, the signal processing is going to be applied. However, I need to give it some makeup gain at the end, because right now my signal's been reduced on average by 4, 5, 6 dB, so I need to add at least a few dB of makeup gain at the end back so that we're back to the original volume we started at. So I'm just going to set this by bypassing the plugin and seeing if there's like a massive change in volume or anything like that. So let's just press play.
I've been drifting away with...
So at around 3 dB, there wasn't a big difference when I turned the plugin on and off. Right now, the compression that's being applied is just random. It's just based on these settings which the compressor opened up with. So let's adjust all the important settings right now. The first one is the ratio. Now this confuses people like crazy, and I'm going to try and make this as simple as I can. So looking at the ratio, a ratio of 2 to 1 would be considered quite a gentle ratio. What the 2 to 1 means is that if you want to get 1 dB out of this compressor, you have to go 2 dB over the threshold. So if I push past the threshold by say 4 dB, it's actually going to be cut down by 2 decibels. So it's basically going to be cut in half after the threshold. So if I increase the ratio to 5 to 1, what that means is that if my signal goes over the threshold by 5 dB, it's going to be cut back down by 4 dB, and we're only going to be left with 1, which is a much more harsh form of compression. And if I keep pushing this, 10 to 1, 20 to 1, you have to go 20 dB past the threshold to get 1 dB out, which means you're practically limiting. So often a limiter is described as a compressor with an infinite ratio, because as soon as the signal touches the threshold, it's just kicked back down or chopped off. So if we take our ratio back, what I'm going to be doing is trying to get quite a bit of gentle compression applied on almost every word. So I don't want the compression to just take down just only the top bits. I kind of want to have this gentle compression to smooth out the whole performance. If you have a vocal that's like very, very consistent, and then there's just one word that jumps up like crazy, then maybe you want to set quite a strong ratio to just really sort of peg down that one word. But in my case, it's kind of just all over the place. So I'm just going to set a gentle ratio, try to get some compression going the whole time. So the next two controls are really closely linked: attack and release. So after the signal has passed the threshold, it's loud, how quickly do we want to take the gain away from it? So naturally, a fast attack time of 0 milliseconds or 1 millisecond, that's going to remove the transient from the sound. So that sharp increase in volume, it's just going to smooth it out. And this makes vocals sound really, really heavy, almost muffled. Whereas if you have a really, really long attack time, all those transients are going to get through, they're not going to have any compression, and they're going to start sounding a little bit all over the place. So lots of people give you specific numbers to aim for, 5, 10, 15 milliseconds, whatever. I actually much prefer to just pretend this dial has no numbers on it at all and just set it until it sounds right. Typically for me, that's a longer attack so that I retain a lot of punch and transient. One of the biggest mistakes I hear with beginners is a super fast attack time. The vocals just start sounding like mush. I'm just going to loop this first phrase so that you can hear the attack on I've, that first word. If I make the attack really short, the word sort of just mushes away. Really long, I get a really punchy transient. So let's start in the middle and I'll adjust those now.
I've been drifting. I've been drifting. I've been drifting.
So what I'm going to do is go over to this section now, just a different part of the vocal. I want to make sure that I can hear the transients on each of these words. If I can't, or I feel they're being mushed, I'm going to have to increase my attack time a little bit more.
Oh, I just might pack my bags and leave.
So that sounds really good, especially on words like bags. That just jumped through at the start, sounded really punchy. The release time, this is the opposite of the attack. This is, okay, so once the signal has fallen below the threshold, how quickly does the compressor recover? So if the compressor recovers immediately, what happens is the vocal just chops up and down in volume really suddenly. Sounds really weird. But if it's too slow, the vocal just sounds like it's bogged down because the compression is just always being applied, which means we're basically just turning our vocal down. So I'll show you both. Let's start with a really fast attack time. Initially, you'll hear the vocal jump up and down a bit. As I push the attack time much longer, you'll hear that the vocal just sounds like I'm just turning it down, basically.
I've been drifting, drifting away with you tonight.
So, but we want to hear the compressor open back up, add the gain to the ends of those phrases, and just recover in between words. So you can see this visibly on the trace here, but use your ears as well.
I've been drifting.
You see how it completely recovers between words?
With you tonight.
So the idea behind this is that when the vocal's loud, the compression's active, and then the compressor releases, And then everything else that isn't being compressed has this makeup gain applied to it. So basically everything gets a boost of 3 dBs besides those loudest parts. And that's why all that low level detail is pulled up by 3 dB. If we're just changing the volume, why would we even use compression? Why wouldn't you just go in with an automation clip on a gain plugin or a fader and just adjust each little bit of every word up and down like crazy? The answer is you probably should do that as well. So that kind of gain automation is excellent, especially if you're being paid to do a mix for someone. Spend an hour or two doing it. It takes ages. It's a skill that takes a long time to develop. And for a 3-minute vocal, you could well spend 45 minutes or an hour just doing the gain automation to make sure that you're actually helping it and not harming it. It's not something that's simple to do.
Don't worry about her, she a dog. Yeah, you the only one to show love. Yeah, all my exes looking like ghosts. Yeah, only see them when I make a post.
Way big of a difference. The vocal seems clear. It has the space and all of those types of things. But at the same time, the reverb seems to be cutting out at the right time in the song. How did we do this? You're going to take 60,000 and divide it by the BPM of the song. And that equals a quarter note, the quarter note of the song. So that's going to give you the quarter note in time of the song. 366 milliseconds is the quarter note of this song. Now, how are you going to apply this to your reverb times? Well, it's fairly simple. When you look at the reverbs that you have, most of these reverbs are going to say reverb time or decay, etc. What you're going to do is, for instance, 366 is telling you that that's the quarter note timing for this song. So obviously you will come right over to your reverb time right here, one sec, and you type in 366, which would be extremely high of a reverb, right? So 3.6, excuse me, sorry guys, 3.66. Okay, so that's what it's basically saying our reverb time should be, right? All right, so let me play that vocal for you by itself so you can get an idea of what it sounds with the quarter.
Don't worry about her, she a dog. Yeah, you the only one to show love. Yeah, all my...
Okay, so granted, still dissipating, still too much of a reverb. And I know you're saying, like, why? What is the problem? Well, a quarter note delay, or excuse me, a quarter note reverb time may be too big for the song that you're looking for. You're looking for something shorter, especially with this vocal that pretty much just goes every second beat of the song. Why don't we use the eighth note? Divide 366 by 2. This gives us the eighth note delay, or the eighth note timing. And if I divide 182 by 2, that'll give us the 16th, and etc. And that's how it goes. So I'm going to take this 182.92 and I'm going to put that in. So 183. So that's there. Okay, so now we got our reverb in a great time. Let me play this for you and let's see if this eighth note works.
Don't worry about her, she a dog. Yeah, you the only one to show love. Yeah, all my exes looking like ghosts. Yeah, only...
And I like that. I like the sound of it. It's literally going in and dissipating like literally right before the next line comes in. And that's what you want. That's how you get your reverbs to be in time and you get more movement from the song. Last thing I'm going to show you is the pre-delay. What the pre-delay's job is, the shorter the pre-delay, basically that's the sooner that the reverb is going to engage on the vocal, on the transient of the vocal. So it's like you'll get more of a drowning sound in the reverb. But if you take that pre-delay and slow it down, you'll get a vocal that cuts through first, then the reverb will attach on top of that. So basically you're just telling the reverb, listen, I don't want you to affect the initial transient or initial cadence of the vocal. I like to get my pre-delay somewhere underneath the 100 millisecond mark. How do I do that? Guess what? I'm gonna divide the quarter note or the eighth note or the 16th note by 2. So I have the 182, let's say for instance, which was my reverb time, was 183 milliseconds. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna divide that by 2. Now that's gonna give me the 16th note. And the 16th note for us is 91. I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna type 91 in, and that's that. So now I'm saying, listen, do not put this reverb on my vocal for 91 milliseconds.